Okay, so let's go ahead and figure out like how we can get this image to clear, and have a margin so that it doesn't, have a problem with this header being on top of it by default. Now, I told you before that whenever you pull stuff out of the document flow, that it doesn't, other things, basically stop paying attention to its margins. And that's exactly what's happening here, is that it's yanked out of the document flow and it moves up. I like to think of it as sort of like if there are a whole bunch of kids standing in line for ice cream at school, right? And one kid gets in trouble, and that kid goes and they get pulled out of the line and they have to go, sit in timeout or something. The rest of the kids aren't going to hold that kid's place. They're all going to move forward. They're not going to pay any more attention to that kid's, physical space, because that kid is now pulled out of the line or out of the document flow. It's the same principle kind of. So what's happening is that when we pulled the header out of the document flow, everything just moved up. All right, because it's taking its natural static order on the page. So what we can do is we can find this first box, or excuse me, not the first box, we can find the container, because everything is inside of the container. Even though this header technically is in the container, technically, the container can move down. The header's still going to stay fixed up at the top. So let's take this container and let's give it a margin top, because if it has a margin top of, let's say, I don't know, like 125 pixels maybe, then that looks a little bit better. And what it's doing is it's putting the margin, basically pushing itself away from its parent, which is the body in this case, because the container is inside of the body if you look at our HTML, right? So it's pushing itself away from the edge of its body parent container, and so it now is moved down. And if we scroll up, that's a lot more natural looking, right? So that's kind of cool. Something else that we might do if we were looking at this header is, aside from actually putting real content inside of it, one of the things that you might notice is that where it says box 1 header, it's actually not styled text. And I shouldn't even say styled, it's not even semantic markup technically. So one of the things you could do here is you could go, hey, I want to make that an actual heading level. So you could go over here in the HTML and you could right click and say edit as HTML. And then you could add some tags around it. And then Google Chrome will render it properly. So let's say end H1. And then I can't hit return. That doesn't work. I can't just click anywhere, but I can click outside of it, and then you see what it did was that turned that into a heading level. Even though I don't have a style for heading level, the default browser style sheet is kicking in and it's making it bigger and bolder. Okay. I do have the text that's inside of this box colored though. Okay, so now we've got the spacing worked out, right? And you could even play around with this and go, okay, well, div 1 is right now we're telling it to be top left. Well, what if it was really supposed to be a footer? Well, you could say instead of top 0, you could say bottom 0 like this, and it goes to the bottom so that it becomes a footer. And then in that case, you would probably want to do something different about how you have your margins. It would be on something down at the bottom. But that's not really what we wanted to do. I just want to show you how you can really use this as a learning tool to kind of mess around with the values and the properties so that you can see what does what. And I think that's going to be really, really important. All right, so what I can do now is I want to show you a few things that you could do with, say, this watermark. This is kind of cool too. Let's say that we literally want it to be like an image watermark. Well, I went and I grabbed through Google search, I went and I just grabbed I don't know, some clip art, a transparent PNG of a monkey's face, and one that wasn't too big. And then I went to the actual page and I'm going to just copy this absolute pathway, the absolute URL, and watch what you can do. Watch what you can do with this inspector. This is kind of cool, is that you could come over here and find the watermark for box 2, and then I can go find where it says background, all right? And if I click on the value of background, we could leave the background color to be this RGBA. It's like a blue color. We could do that if we wanted. I'm going to arrow over, and you always want to put your URL image after the background color if you're using shorthand. And so I'm going to say URL, and then I'll put my parentheses, and I'll go back inside of my parentheses, and I'll paste that URL that I had, and you'll see that the picture it's showing up, but it's a gigantic picture. So we still have to do a few more things over here, and give it some more information. Let's go ahead and say first of all that it is. Let's make sure that it won't repeat. First of all, let's say no dash repeat because it's a watermark. We don't want it repeating. And let's also say that we want to make sure that it stays centered. So we could say center, and then we could also say center if we want to be doubly sure that it's centered vertically and horizontally. And let's do that. Now the thing is that we need to change the position of it because I don't really like the way that that looks. Or not the position, the background size. There is a whole nother CSS3 property that is called background dash size. Okay, and then what I can do is that if I just put, let's say that I want a width to fit in 100%. If I put 100%, it's going to automatically know that that's supposed to be for the width. Okay, and it will do the height proportionally, or I could also say auto. Okay, so it's going to be 100% width and then automatic for the height. All right, and then so I've got this little cute watermark. Well, maybe I don't want it to actually have that background color, or maybe I do. Maybe I want a background color, but maybe I want it to be a circle. So let's go over here where the background color is, and I guess we can leave the background color for right now, but let's give it, let's go down here at the bottom, and let's add a border. Okay, so first of all, let's do a border, and let's say that it's going to be 1 pixel, and you want to put a space, and you can tell it to be solid, and let's also give it a color. Let's say that it's going to be kind of like a, I don't know, like a gray color, like a 888 or something like that. It's got a really light gray, well, maybe something a little bit brighter, maybe CCC. Okay, so it's a little bit brighter. Well, one of the other things that I can do too, if I want to make it a circle, is that I can say border radius dash radius, okay? And then I can tell it, since it's a perfect square, I know that the height and the width, if you look up here, they're constrained to 100 by 100 pixels. They're perfectly square. Then I could say 50% for the border radius, and that's what it'll do. It'll actually turn it into a circle, which is pretty cool. You may have already learned this, and but then I've got this nice little circular watermark. But the monkey kind of seems to be a little bit too big in there, first of all. So let's come back up here where it says background size, and let's maybe set it to about 90%. So that's pretty cool. And because we told it to be centered, it's automatically centering that background image, and it's not repeating. Okay. And the other thing too is to see if you hover over the image, it'll show you a little picture, and it shows you its natural size, which should be 300 pixels by 264 pixels, right? So that's a good thing to know. It's handy. Now the other thing that I'm noticing is I really don't like the text on top of my watermark icon. So what I could do is come up here and I could right click in the edit as text, or edit as, sorry, HTML. And I could actually just get rid of that information right there and click somewhere else, and it goes away. And now I've got this cute little monkey. Okay, well, problem is now I don't really like the way that that circle is sitting on both edges. So what I need to do is change where it sits on the bottom and on the right. So for my bottom offset, I'll do, let's say 10 pixels. Let's try that. We can do the same for the right offset as well. 10 pixels. And then you see it's sitting just a little bit off the edge, and that's a little bit better looking. And you could also figure, maybe you didn't like it that big. You could change it so that instead of being 100 by 100, maybe it's, I don't know, 90 by 90. And maybe you even like this oval shape too. Who knows, right? So you can play around with that. It could be smaller, anything you want, right? Now, what I want you to also notice, though, is that if I were to take this and let's say that I go up here to where it says container, and I wanted to, let's say that I really like the idea of the monkey being in the lower right part of my web page instead of up here. Let's say that I want it to be on the entire web page, and not just over on top of the picture. I could go up to the container, and what would I want to do? Right, think about this for a second. I would want to take position relative off. I'm not going to completely get rid of it. I'm just going to deselect it so you can automatically kind of see what happens. But it does scroll with the page, so maybe I would want it to stay kind of fixed, right? You know, it does go on top of other stuff though, so you'd have to kind of figure that out. But maybe what I might want it to do is if I go up here and I choose div 2, maybe instead of position absolute, maybe I actually want it to be fixed. And then it'll always stay in the bottom right corner of my web page. Right? So that's just something to think about as well, right? And you could kind of monkey, no pun intended, monkey around with that. I love the idea of monkeys because they're so silly. All right, so anyway, and then if you wanted to also mess around with some other stuff, you could come down here and if you scrolled, you would find these paragraph texts. So you could tell those instead of maybe being 300 pixels, which is a fixed dimension, you could maybe tell them to be maybe like, I don't know, 80% or something. And then you see that it cascades and it changes all of them. The other thing that you might want to think about too is what would happen if, say, you wanted one of these paragraphs to have a different background color than the others. Well, or even better yet, let's say that you wanted to see what it would look like if every other paragraph had a different background color. Well, what you could do is now we need to actually make a rule that does not exist. And to do that, what I would want to do is select the paragraph, okay? Because I do want it to be based off of a P, but I want to do it as something that's referred to as a pseudo element, okay? And this is a little bit more advanced, so if you don't want to mess with this, that's fine, I don't care. You could go over here, click on this little plus button, right? And you would take the P, but instead of just P, you would put a colon because you want it to be a pseudo element, and you would say nth dash child. Okay, so it's like every whatever number of child it is, and then you would put in parentheses, you would say, let's say odd, would have a background. Let's try background color here, or just background, and let's just see what happens. Okay, so what it's doing is it's actually counting after the first one, and it's picking that. So you could also then, let's just go ahead and stick with yellow green, why not? You could also then go here and see what it does whenever you say even. All right, and then it switches. Okay, so that's all really pretty cool stuff, right? Now let's say that you found something really special that you wanted to highlight, and maybe inside the second paragraph. Let's say that you wanted to add a span somewhere, so we'll say edit as HTML, or let's do this, instead of span, let's say that it's going to be a strong tag that has a class equal to, like, I don't know, highlight, or we'll call it highlighter, okay? So it's a highlighter class, and then maybe what we can do is end it here, so end strong. And by default, it's already going to make the text bolder because that's what's happening with the default browser style sheet. But what we could do is we could also say, hey, if there is an element, let's click the plus, and we don't need P right now. We're going to say any element that is the strong whose class, and I put the dot immediately, is assigned to be highlighter. Right, I don't put a space after strong because that would mean that highlighter is a descendant of strong, whereas in this case, highlighter is actually applied to strong. What we could do then is we could say background, and let's just say like yellow or something like that. Right, and then you can see that what it did was it highlighted that. And you'll notice that when I clicked on the strong in the HTML, it actually is not grayed out anymore down here. All right, so anyway, that's going to kind of end this demonstration, and you could move on from here and do all sorts of cool stuff. And I'm going to leave that to you. So play around with this page. You can refresh it as many times as you want and start over. Do whatever you want with it. That's it.